My dad tried to control my future. I finally fought back. Since I was 10, my dad told everyone I was going to be a doctor, even before I knew what that meant. My son, the future surgeon, he'd announce at family gatherings, his hand heavy on my shoulder, squeezing just enough to remind me of the weight of his expectations. I'd stand there, nodding on cue, watching relatives smile approvingly. That script was written long before I could hold a pencil. My future was decided in conversations I wasn't invited to join, mapped out in a life plan I never consented to. The thing about growing up under that kind of singular vision is that you don't even realize there's another way to exist. My childhood bedroom was decorated with human anatomy charts instead of band posters. My bookshelves filled with medical encyclopedias my father would quiz me on during dinner. Summer camps weren't for fun. They were academic programs designed to boost my application. Even my friends were subtly vetted. The ones with ambitious parents who shared my father's vision for their children were welcomed into our home. The others, the artists, the dreamers, the ones with no direction, were politely but firmly discouraged. I excelled, of course. When excellence is the only currency that buys momentary freedom, you learn to hoard it. Perfect grades, president of science club, volunteer hours at the local hospital. I built the resume my father wanted, collecting achievements like armor to protect myself from his disappointment. The praise that followed these accomplishments was the closest thing to unconditional love I knew. "That's my son," he'd say, voice rich with pride that felt like oxygen to me then. Looking back, I can see now that I wasn't a person to him, I was a project. An investment. The vessel for dreams he couldn't achieve himself. He'd immigrated to this country with nothing, worked himself to the bone in a factory for 30 years. His hands, perpetually rough and calloused, were daily reminders of what he'd sacrificed. "I did all this so you could have choices," he'd say, while systematically eliminating any choice that didn't align with his vision. College acceptance letters came exactly as planned. I remember the day the envelope from Johns Hopkins arrived, his eyes shining with tears as he clutched it, whispering something in his native tongue that I couldn't quite catch but understood was gratitude to whatever forces had aligned to make his dreams for me possible. I smiled too, but something inside me had already begun to crack. A hairline fracture in the foundation of the person I'd been built to be. The first time I admitted to myself that I hated medicine, I cried in a campus bathroom stall. It wasn't dramatic, no sobbing or wailing, just silent tears and the crushing weight of realizing I'd been running someone else's race for as long as I could remember. I was 3 semesters into pre-med, acing organic chemistry while feeling absolutely nothing.
No pasión. No curiosity.
Just the mechanical execution of excellence I'd perfected over years of conditional approval. That same week, I wandered into a film screening at the Campus Arts Center. It was pure accident. I was looking for a quiet place to study and got the rooms mixed up, but I stayed. For 2 hours, I watched a documentary about climate refugees that left me breathless. When the lights came up, the director took questions and I found myself raising my hand, asking about storytelling techniques, camera choices, the ethics of documentary filmmaking. My voice didn't even sound like mine. It was animated, curious, alive in a way I hadn't felt in maybe ever. I bought a used DSLR camera the next day. Nothing fancy, just enough to start teaching myself the basics. I'd wake up early, before my roommate, and watch YouTube tutorials with headphones on. I'd stay up late editing simple projects on free software, my heart racing with an excitement I'd never felt dissecting a frog or memorizing amino acid chains. For the first time, I was learning something because I wanted to, not because it was expected of me. I started a YouTube channel documenting campus life from my perspective. Nothing groundbreaking, just honest reflections on being a first-generation college student, the pressures of academic excellence, the isolation of feeling like an imposter. I never showed my face, just my voice over carefully composed shots of campus architecture, changing seasons, the repetitive rhythms of student life. It was cathartic. It was mine. It was the first thing I'd ever created that wasn't designed to please someone else. Meanwhile, I maintained the facade, called home every Sunday, reported my grades, talked about medical school applications even as I was secretly taking film electives. I became skilled at compartmentalizing, pre-med student by day, aspiring filmmaker by night. The double life was exhausting but necessary. I wasn't ready for the confrontation that would inevitably come when worlds collided. He found my secret YouTube channel during Thanksgiving break of my junior year. My cousin, who I'd foolishly trusted with my secret, mentioned it at dinner, not realizing my father didn't know. The table went quiet. My father asked for the link in that dangerously calm voice I knew preceded storms. Later that night, I heard him in his study, the muffled sound of my own voice coming through his computer speakers as he watched every single video I'd ever made. He found me in the kitchen at midnight. I was making tea, trying to calm my racing heart, when he appeared in the doorway. "Explain this," he said, placing his laptop on the counter. On screen was my most recent video, a visual essay about the pressure cooker of pre-med culture and its impact on mental health. 20,000 views. Hundreds of comments from students saying I'd articulated exactly what they were feeling. "It's just a hobby," I said weakly, though we both knew it was much more than that. "A hobby?" he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "Is this why your MCAT practice scores dropped? You're throwing away everything we've worked for." "For what? To make little movies? To be nobody?" The argument that followed wasn't loud. My father doesn't yell. He cuts deeper with quiet precision. He spoke of sacrifice, of duty, of how I was betraying not just him but generations before who never had the opportunities one was squandering. He recited the costs of my education down to the dollar. He reminded me of promises I'd made when I was too young to understand what I was promising. By the time he finished, I felt hollowed out, a shell of self-loathing and guilt. I almost gave in then. Almost deleted the channel, apologized, and recommitted to the path he'd chosen. It would have been easier. The path of least resistance always is. But something had changed in me. Those videos, those hours of creation, they'd shown me a version of myself I couldn't bear to bury again. "I'm sorry I disappointed you," I said finally, "but I'm not sorry for finding something I love." The silence that followed was worse than any shouting could have been. He looked at me like I was a stranger who had invaded his home. Perhaps I was. The person standing in that kitchen making a stand wasn't the compliant son he'd crafted. I went back to campus the next day, the fracture between us widening into a chasm I wasn't sure could ever be bridged. Back at school, I sought out Professor Levin, my film studies teacher who'd taken an interest in my work. I told her everything, the double life, the confrontation, the crossroads I was facing. She listened without judgment, then asked the question that would change everything. "What do you want your life to look like in 10 years? No one had ever asked me that before. Not really. They'd asked what I wanted to be. A doctor, obviously, but never how I wanted to live. The question cracked something open inside me. I realized I'd been so focused on becoming what my father wanted that I'd never developed a vision of my own. Over the next few weeks, with Professor Levin's guidance, I began to build one. Not a career path exactly, but a life, one with creativity at its center, one where I could tell stories that mattered, one where I woke up each morning actually wanting to do the work ahead of me. I told him I was dropping out of med school applications over winter break. We sat in his study, the room where decisions about my life had always been handed down rather than discussed. "I'm not applying to medical school," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm switching my major to film and media studies for my senior year." He looked at me like I'd just murdered someone. The silence stretched between us, thick with decades of expectations suddenly collapsing. Finally, he spoke, his voice frighteningly quiet. "If you do this, you are on your own. I will not pay for you to waste your life." I'd expected this. Still, hearing it spoken aloud sent ice through my veins. Financial independence at 21, with a year of college still ahead, was terrifying. But in that moment, I realized something that gave me strength. I'd rather struggle doing something I loved than succeed at something that was slowly killing me. "I understand," I said, and I did. My father came from a world where security trumped fulfillment, where practicality was the only sensible path. He couldn't comprehend choosing passion over stability because he'd never had the luxury of that choice. We were speaking different languages across an unbridgeable generational and cultural divide. That spring semester was the hardest of my life. I moved out of my apartment into a shared house with 5 other students to cut costs. I took on 2 part-time jobs, barista mornings, campus tech support evenings, while carrying a full course load. I applied for every scholarship and grant available to film students, eventually securing a modest stipend for a documentary project on first-generation immigrants working in healthcare, a topic that felt like both an olive branch to my father and a declaration of my own voice. He didn't talk to me for almost a year, but I was finally me. That silence was both punishment and strange gift. Without his voice in my head questioning every decision, I found clarity I'd never known. My grades actually improved once I was studying something that engaged me. My YouTube channel grew to 50,000 subscribers. A short documentary I made about student debt won a regional film festival award. I was broke but creating, struggling but alive. The reconciliation, when it finally came, wasn't dramatic. No tearful embraces or sweeping apologies from either side. My father came to my graduation ceremony, sat stiffly in the audience as I received my diploma in film studies rather than biology. Afterwards, he shook my hand formally, asked about my plans. I told him about the production assistant job I'd landed at a documentary film company in Chicago. A foot in the door, entry-level but with potential. He nodded, his face unreadable. "You have a place to live?" he asked finally. "A room in a shared apartment," I replied. "It's small, but it's what I can afford right now." He reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope. "Security deposit," he said gruffly. "Loan, not gift. You'll pay it back." It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was acknowledgement. Recognition that the path I'd chosen, while not his choice, was still a path. Over the following years, our relationship thawed gradually. He didn't ask about my work at first, but my mother would slip mentions of my professional progress into their calls. Eventually, he started watching the documentaries I worked on, offering stiff but genuine congratulations when one aired on PBS. 5 years after our breaking point, I invited him to a film festival where my first feature-length documentary was premiering. The subject, healthcare workers in underserved communities, had been inspired by his own immigrant journey, though I'd never told him that. He sat in the darkened theater, watching medical professionals I'd profiled speaking about their calling, their challenges, their purpose. Afterward, in the lobby, a doctor featured in the film approached us, shook my hand, then turned to my father. "Your son has a gift," she said. "He made us feel seen in a way nobody has before." My father looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time seeing not the doctor I failed to become but the filmmaker I was. "Yes," he said quietly. "He does. We're not perfect. There's still tension, still moments where the old disappointment flashes across his face. But there's respect now too, grudging at first, then genuine. He keeps a framed poster from my first major film in his study, right next to his citizenship certificate. 2 different kinds of American dreams realized in the same family. Standing in my own truth cost me years of my father's approval, but it gained me something more valuable, my life, lived on my own terms. Sometimes choosing yourself feels like war, but it's worth every scar. The golden child died, but the man who emerged from those ashes is someone I'm proud to be. Someone who tells stories that matter. Someone who, finally, is writing his own script rather than performing one handed to him. I think my father is starting to understand that the most meaningful legacy isn't creating a carbon copy of yourself, but raising someone strong enough to become their own person, even when that means walking away from the future you imagined for them. That, perhaps, is the most difficult and important lesson of parenthood. One I hope to remember, should I have children of my own someday. For now, I'm building a career, film by film, creating the life I want, day by day, and slowly rebuilding a relationship with my father based not on his dreams for me, but on who we both actually are. It's harder than following the prescribed path ever would have been. It's also infinitely more worth it.